my head that's the problem. It looks like a light bulb. It's almost as if my neck has suddenly had a really good idea.
Frank Skinner's Opinionated.
It's like a self-help group for opinionated people.
Friday at 10 on BBC Two. Vast, polluted, overpopulated. Welcome to one of the most extreme cities on the planet. But for the people of Lagos, this is a place of opportunity.
Our business is just like the stock market. The only difference is only the suit and the tie and the fine shoes.
And a place where they triumph over adversity.
You can see the unity among the poor ghetto people who work in the dump.
It's a great place to live.
Welcome to Lagos. Continues tomorrow at 9 on BBC Two.
Hello and welcome to BBC Learning Zone on BBC Two. And coming up in the early hours this morning, we've programmes for schools. And it's more GCSE Bitesize English this morning to help you focus on the reading and writing skills you'll need for Paper 1 of your English exam on non-fiction and media texts.
Hello and welcome to GCSE Bitesize. This programme on English, reading and writing non-fiction and media, focuses on the skills that you will need to do well in Paper 1 of your exam. The two other programmes on English are on Poetry and Macbeth. So let's get going on how you can score in your GCSE English exam Paper 1. Because a large chunk of the marks, almost a third, depends on how well you can read non-fiction and media texts, and how well you can produce your own piece of writing, which argues, persuades, or advises. No matter which exam board's English syllabus you're studying, you will need to answer a question on your reading of non-fiction and media texts. Some boards, such as AQA, Specification A and B, and OCR, will require you to answer on both non-fiction and media in the one paper. Whilst other boards, such as Edexcel, will require you to respond to either non-fiction or media, depending on which option you've taken. Whichever syllabus you are studying, this programme will give you the skills to do well in your exam. It's also hard to understand sometimes how the marks are worked out in English syllabus. You may have to spend about half a term or more studying a play by Shakespeare and producing a piece of written coursework for which you get a maximum of 5%. Then, in an exam lasting only 1 3/4 hours, you answer 2 or 3 questions worth at least 30%. The best way to study with Bitesize is to tackle one topic at a time, working through the video in bite-sized chunks. Each programme is full of useful information and sample questions for you to try. Throughout the programme, we'll be giving you exercises to do. All you have to do is pause the tape when you see this sign. And there's more in the GCSE Bitesize books and on the GCSE Bitesize website at www.bbc.co.uk/revision. We've divided the programme into 2 main parts, reading and writing. In the first part, we'll look at the skills you need to read non-fiction and media texts effectively. In the second part, we'll concentrate on the skills necessary to write well in the exam. You can always fast forward to view the section you need the most help with, because the clock on the screen will keep track of where you are in the programme. This part, on reading non-fiction and media, is divided into 5 sections. What is a non-fiction text? What is a media text? Approaching a text which focuses on purpose and audience. Analysing a text which looks at format, layout, language and argument. And finally, comparing non-fiction and media texts. So, first things first, what exactly is meant by non-fiction text? If I asked you to spot the difference between what is fiction and what is non-fiction, you'd probably be able to do it. Have a look at this list of different texts. A recipe, a Thomas Hardy short story, an extract from an autobiography, a play script, a train timetable, an extract from a personal diary, safety instructions, a piece of travel writing, a novel by Jane Austen, the Premier League football table, lyrics to a pop song, an obituary, a Shakespearean sonnet, a book on environmental change. Now pause the tape and sort the texts into 2 groups, fiction or non-fiction. No real problem with those then. If pushed to define the main difference between fiction and non-fiction, we could say that fiction is made up in the imagination of the author and is designed mainly for the purpose of describing a story, events, and characters for the entertainment or enjoyment of the reader. Non-fiction, on the other hand, is writing which is largely based on facts, events or experiences that have actually taken place, and is writing which usually has a specific purpose in mind. For example, to provide information to the reader, or to argue a particular point of view, or to persuade the reader to a specific course of action. Here's an example. A speech made by a politician, especially in the run-up to a general election, is likely to be designed to persuade us to vote for that particular political party. Here's a well-known face attempting to do just that.
I was one of the lucky people in life. I had wonderful parents, a great upbringing, I had marvelous teachers, I had people that guided and helped me all through my life. I've got a wonderful wife and family. And I want to give something back to the society and the country in which I live and in which I believe.
If you think about it, the number of non-fiction texts which you come across each day is enormous. For example, when you get up in the morning, you might read the headlines in the daily newspaper. On your way to school, you might buy a bus or train ticket which will contain information about your journey. While sitting on the bus or train, you might read a magazine review of the latest CD from your favourite band. At school, in your English lesson, you might study a couple of chapters from an autobiography which the class is currently covering. Or in science, you might read a report on how important our genetic makeup is in determining our behaviour. And at the end of the day, you might even curl up in bed with a chapter or 2 from the Diary of Anne Frank. That's the problem. There are so many types of non-fiction text, and they have so many different functions. Some you might just throw in the bin. Others could change your life. A useful way to try and make sense of the massive range of non-fiction texts which we deal with is to break them down into 2 different groups. The first is what we might call non-literary non-fiction, and the second is what we can call literary non-fiction. The main feature of non-literary non-fiction is that it's writing whose main purpose is to inform, explain, describe, argue, persuade or advise in a very straightforward manner using language which is direct and to the point in a no-nonsense style. In this subgenre of non-literary non-fiction, we would include writing like bus tickets, recipes, railway timetables, Premier League results tables, weather forecast, information leaflets, holiday itineraries, and so on. The main feature of literary non-fiction is that whilst its main focus is still primarily to provide information, argue a case, or present a point of view, it does this using the style and tone of voice normally associated with fictional writing. For example, by attempting to create a narrative or story surrounding the events or experiences being described, by vivid description of characters, or by the use of figurative language to help create pictures and images in the mind of the reader. In this subgenre of literary non-fiction, we would include writing like biography, autobiography, journals and diaries, letters, travel writing, natural world, and reportage. Later on in the programme, we'll look at how a particular historical event is treated by different writers of literary non-fiction. But now, let's have a look at a particular piece of literary non-fiction, travel writing, to try and illustrate some of its main features. Bill Bryson is an accomplished travel writer who lived for 21 years in Britain. One of his books is called Notes from a Small Island, where he takes a humorous look at various people and places he experienced in his time in this country. In this clip, he records his feelings about Oxford.
I have the greatest respect for the university and its 800 years of tireless intellectual toil, but I must confess that I'm not entirely clear what it's for, now that Britain no longer needs colonial administrators who can quip in Latin. But I digress. My gripe with Oxford has nothing to do with how it educates its scholars. My gripe with Oxford is that so much of it is so ugly. Come with me down Merton Street, and I'll show you what I mean. Note that we are immersed in an architectural treasure house, an unquestionably becoming prospect of gabled buildings, elaborate wrought iron gates, and fine 17th century townhouses. But what is this inescapable intrusion at the bottom? Is it an electrical substation? A halfway house designed by the inmates? No, it is the Merton College Warden's Quarters, a little dash of mindless 60s excrescence foisted on an otherwise largely flawless street. Perhaps I'm too hard on poor old Oxford. I mean, it's basically a wonderful place, with its bookshops and scholarly air. Above all, I like to drink in the pubs, where you can sit with a book and not be looked on as a social miscreant, and be among laughing, lively young people, and lose yourself in reveries of what it was like when you too had energy and a flat stomach, and thought of sex as something more than a welcome chance for a lie down. What an enigma Britain is. But the fact remains that this is still the best place in the world to post a letter, watch television, or go for a walk. It's got interesting statues of worthy Victorians, pubs, helpful policemen, and even kindly people who stop to help you when you fall down.
This is the only nation I know where wit really is an admired and cultivated trait. And you watch people, and they won't go more than a couple of minutes without smiling or exchanging a joke. And I think that is really the most sterling quality of British people, and that is the one thing I'll miss.
Although the main purpose of Bill Bryson's book, Notes from a Small Island, is to inform you, the reader or viewer, about life in Britain, it's done in a very imaginative and entertaining style. Bryson writes largely in standard English, using lots of vivid, imaginative, humorous, ironic and satirical language, and a style to match, to grasp and maintain your interest as a reader. That's the end of the section on defining non-fiction texts. So we've made a first stab at defining non-fiction texts. But what do we mean when we refer to media texts? And in what ways are they similar to or different from non-fiction texts? A simple but very useful definition of a media text is a text which combines images. For example, pictures, diagrams, sketches, cartoons, etc., with words or text to create meanings. Have a look at this list of texts and identify the media texts which combine images with words or text to create meanings. Then pause the tape and make your notes. A transcript of a political speech. An episode of a TV soap. A feature film. A biography of Miss Dynamite. A magazine on BMX bikes. A TV documentary. A CD-ROM computer game. A letter to your MP. An eyewitness account of the sinking of the Titanic in 1912. An email to your favourite football player. A teenage magazine advert for anti-zit cream. A mobile phone text message to your best friend. A daily newspaper. So how did you do? Again, no real problem in identifying those texts which combine both images and words to get their message or meaning over. You might also have noticed that apart from the examples of the TV soap and the feature film, all of these media texts can be placed within the type of text or genre of non-fiction, as they all deal with facts, events or experiences that are real or have actually happened. The TV soap and the feature film, on the other hand, originate from the imagination of the scriptwriters, producers, directors and so on, responsible for their production. Media texts can be further subdivided into three broad types. Those dealing with the static image, all print-based forms like newspapers, magazines, information leaflets, advertisements and so on. Those dealing with the moving image, mainly all TV programs and film-based forms. And those dealing with interactive media, for example, web pages, interactive games and the like. For the purposes of your English exam, however, you will be dealing exclusively with media texts which are of the static or print-based variety. For example, newspapers, magazines, information leaflets, advertisements and so on. So let's try and draw some of this together. In Paper 1, Section A of your English exam, you will be asked to read and interpret 2 or 3 different types of non-fiction texts, including at least one which is a print-based media text. You won't know which text the examiners will have picked for you to answer on this year, so you've got 3 choices. You could try and guess, you could break into the examiner's offices, or you can use Bitesize to get prepared. That brings us to the end of the section defining what we mean by media text. So how do you approach a non-fiction or media text in the right way every time? Let's look at a film about Greenpeace, the worldwide environmental pressure group. Greenpeace is a campaigning organisation that produces vast quantities of literature to campaign for environmental issues. We went to meet them to find out how they put their leaflets together.
My name is Jackie Marsh and I work in the information unit in Greenpeace, and I'm responsible for coordinating the production of all the leaflets and fact sheets that we write about our campaigns. Producing leaflets is really important to Greenpeace to help us get our campaign message across. We get lots of inquiries and it's the way that we can actually answer all those inquiries and send out our information. The leaflets that we produce in this office can have a huge impact around the world, so we'll often send them to our offices in Canada, Australia, and also to the Netherlands, where they're distributed to countries that don't have offices. Well, this is one of the most recent information leaflets that we've produced, and it's about ancient forests. And it talks about all the threats to ancient forests, from logging and just overall destruction, and the problems that could cause if we don't try and do something about it. But it also has ideas for what we can do about it.
Some good points are made there. And that's because 2 absolutely vital questions have been identified. What is the text trying to do? Who is it aimed at? Answer these 2 questions and you've put yourself on the right track straight away. Almost everything we'll be saying about the texts in this programme comes back to purpose and audience. In the case of the Greenpeace sequence, which you've just watched, the purpose and audience relating to the Greenpeace poster are easily identifiable. The purpose of the poster is to promote the preservation of the world's ancient forests. The main target audience for the poster campaign is those with an interest in environmental issues worldwide. If identifying purpose and audience are the keys to understanding any non-fiction or media text, they are even more critical in the context of adverts. We are bombarded almost every minute of every day by advertising, whose main purpose is to sell us something, or a way of life, or an idea.
Advertising is just a branch of communication, and in all communication, since it first started with like hieroglyphics in Egypt, there are some basic rules.
The more I see you, the more I want you.
What you say in your ad is determined, for a large extent, by your audience, what we call the target market. And there's many ways you can split the target market between old and young, between men and women, between old men, young women. Obviously, there's many ways. And that's because most products aren't bought just by everyone, and so there'll be a lot of wastage, a lot of wasted money. Even BT, where everyone uses a phone, there's different ads for teenagers, from the ads they do for internet users, for the ads they do for housewives. And this is probably the first question we ask ourselves when we do any bit of advertising is, who is this ad aimed at? And that's very critical. We've got to get that right, because that's what makes you decide on the tone of voice you use and what you actually say. So you have an idea, and say with Häagen-Dazs, it was to sell ice cream, which is usually aimed at children, to adults. And what we're trying to conjure up there is that ice cream is sexy. So the way the photos are shot, the models used, the way the type is, the words that you're saying, everything is supporting that idea that this is a sexy product.
So for advertisers, purpose and audience are equally central to the success or failure of any advert. In the case of advertising, the purpose of the ad is also linked to the idea of representation. By representation, we mean the way that the key idea of the ad, its purpose, is represented or put across to the audience. We'll look at the idea of representation, which is specific to media texts, in a bit more detail later on in the programme. In the case of the Häagen-Dazs ice cream advert, the purpose and audience are equally easy to identify. The purpose of the advert is to sell ice cream. And the audience being targeted is adults, as opposed to children, who would normally be the target for an ice cream ad. Magazines are a very common type of media text, which equally need to appeal to distinct target audiences. A crucial aspect of this appeal is the magazine cover. Look at this sequence on magazine covers.
There are loads and loads of magazines for us to spend our money on. But how do the magazines convince us to part with our hard-earned cash? Well, as you can probably guess, it's the covers that sell the magazines.
So, with that in mind, I'm off to visit the London headquarters of one of the largest magazine publishers in Britain.
The key thing about a good cover is that it really knows its reader, and it's really clearly targeted at that one person, no one else. From the choice of the photo, to the cover lines, to the design, you know, every single ingredient that goes into that cover is all about targeting the J17 reader. If you get the right cover, you know, you could sell 50,000 more issues. We like to think J17 is cooler than the other teenage magazines. It's got a bit more attitude to it. We like to think that our readers are leaders rather than followers. So we like that to be reflected in our cover.
So for the J17 magazine, the purpose is to entertain and provide information for its readers. The audience, who they see or target, as 16 to 17-year-old females with attitude. Purpose and audience. These two questions are vital. They tell you why a text was written. Once you have a handle on them, you can focus on how the text was written, and then start analysing the nuts and bolts of the text. Knowing how the text was written allowed the people we saw earlier to make their points clearly. That's the end of the section on approaching a text. Now we move on to analysing a text. Audience and purpose are central themes when analysing any non-fiction or media text. But there are other important issues as well, such as format and layout, language, and argument. Let's look in a little more detail at the Greenpeace leaflet, which we came across earlier. In this sequence, we see clearly how important the format or layout of a text is, and how it relates closely to those central issues of purpose and audience, which we've just discussed. OK, stop there. What do you notice straight away when you look at this text closely? Well, the first thing you might notice is the heading. Subheadings, maps and diagrams, illustrations, paragraphs, and these little leaves which are dotted around. So all you have to do is write a list of them and that's your grade A, isn't it? Well, you're wrong. Remember what we said about purpose and audience. That list only starts to mean anything if we can say why the text is organised the way it is. It all starts to become clear, doesn't it? Non-fiction and media texts organise and present information in different ways in order to get the meaning across to the reader. And that's what examiners want to know when they ask about format and layout. Let's continue analysing in detail the Greenpeace leaflet.
So the heading of the whole leaflet is designed to draw the reader in straight away. How you can help save the world's last ancient forests. And this is followed immediately in the first subheading by a question: what are ancient forests? So it gives that sense of inquiry. We've broken the text up into smaller paragraphs to make it more manageable, and it means that they all serve as individual specific topics in their own right. Each of the paragraphs has an illustration, either a diagram or a photograph, which makes it more alive and brings the reader in straight away to have a look at what we're talking about. So to catch your eye and draw your attention across the whole leaflet, it's interspersed with these little green leaves, and they have small suggestions of things that you can do on them, upbeat, written in lowercase to make them more approachable, and they help break up the rest of the text. And finally, within the chunks of text, we've got some terms picked out in bold. They're specialist terms that we wouldn't necessarily expect everyone to understand, but they can go away and look them up, or teachers can base a classroom discussion around them. So the overall purpose of the format design is to get our message across more effectively and to make it attractive for the reader to look at.
So when you're looking at format and layout, remember this checklist. Look at the heading. This will often introduce the subject and give you some clues as to what the piece is about. Subheadings often highlight the main sections and help to guide you to important points. Paragraphs break up the text. They allow the writer to change focus. Check out any tables and charts, as these can also reinforce the text and summarise a large amount of factual information very clearly. Symbols and logos are quick ways of catching the eye and perhaps reinforcing a brand identity. These will give you a clue as to where the leaflet is coming from. Different font styles can also emphasize the importance or meaning of words, as can bold type, which can draw attention to key points. And finally, look at the illustrations. These can be used to reinforce the text or make an emotional impact on the reader. But remember, leaflets are only one type of non-fiction and media text. Let's go back to our advertisers. What are the main format and layout issues when dealing with adverts?
The accepted view, the way the eye works on a written page or on a poster, is that you start in the top left-hand corner and your eye works down to the bottom right-hand corner. That's why nearly always logos, coupons are in the bottom right-hand corner. Once you know those rules, obviously you can subvert those rules. So, for example, Audi put their logo in the top left-hand corner. Why do they do that? Probably just so that they're slightly different cars. They're trying to be slightly different to Mercedes and BMW. Their ads are that, oh, we're slightly quirky. Text is mainly used, and the type of typeface is used to, one, communicate your message, but also to help you with the tone of voice. When we were working on Lloyds Bank, for example, and we were doing some ads for teenagers, for people who were going to become students, and the lines were going down very well in research, but not when the ads were actually made up. The ads were then going down badly, and that's because we were being forced at the time to use their corporate typeface, which was very old-fashioned, very venerable and sincere, because that's the impression they wanted to give. But the typeface wasn't helping the gags that we'd written. They were coming over far too serious. So it was a very simple thing. By changing the typeface into something more funky, people then knew that, these lines were meant to be funny, and they read them in that way.
So in advertising, there are certain rules or conventions which must be followed. One of the most important being that the information which the advertiser is trying to get across should run from the top left of the advert to the bottom right. That is, following the way that we normally read adverts. Only when we know these rules can they be challenged, as in the case of the Audi advert. Also, font and typeface, as in the case of the Lloyds Bank campaign, need to be related to purpose, but more importantly, audience. Issues of format and layout are equally important for those who are involved in producing magazines.
Stuart, how does the layout of the cover work with the different bits? You've got the title, the girl, the taglines, and the gift. How do you fit them all together?
Well, it's just like any other magazine, sort of a base set in conventions, and the main one of that, I think, is that the top third of the cover is going to have a really strong, recognisable, distinctive logo. Then what we're also looking at in that top sort of area is, real good eye contact from the model. So when the cover's on the shelf, your eyes meet the models, and you really establish a link straight away. Then as we're coming down the magazine, we've kind of have your main cover lines, which is just to tell you what the main features are that month. Whether it's kind of a really good celebrity feature that you might have got in there.
Just as there are conventions or rules in advertising, there are also rules which govern the production of magazine front covers. For example, a strong main image or picture is crucial in order to gain the immediate attention of the target audience. In addition, there needs to be enough room surrounding the main image for the title and straplines, which make references to the feature articles. The top third of the page is the main area for getting across the most important information. The text should surround the image in a clear manner. So, the format really tells you a lot about the purpose and audience of a text. Once you've got a handle on this, you can look at format's most important function, to allow the language to work on the audience. Language refers to the author's choice of words and how the author combines these into sentences. Format and language really work together, and to get the higher marks, you've got to understand how the language is being used. Don't underestimate the importance of language in any non-fiction and media text. It's all carefully constructed. When it comes to non-fiction and media texts, every word is designed to achieve a specific effect. So how do you go about unpicking the language of a text? A lot of people have trouble answering questions on language because it's hard to know where to start. One useful question to ask yourself when you start is how much use the author has made of fact and opinion. It's a basic difference, but one that examiners are interested in, because it tells you whether a writer is trying to inform you or persuade you. Facts are things we know for certain are true, like a statistic. They can be proved, and in most cases are accepted by everyone. Opinions are personal. They are the views which we hold as individuals, and not everybody holds the same views. Telling a fact from an opinion can sometimes be tricky. Try it. Have a think about the following statements. Which are facts and which opinions? Then pause the tape and have a go. Will Young won the first series of Pop Idol. Gareth Gates is an excellent singer. Manchester United won the Premier League in 2003. Liverpool are boring to watch. Exams are really enjoyable. Birmingham is 98 miles from London. The Sony PlayStation is the best game console in the world. David Beckham plays for Real Madrid. Victoria Beckham is a terrific singer. A star is the highest GCSE grade. Hopefully, you'll easily have spotted which were facts and which were opinions. Here are the correct answers. But it isn't so much telling them apart which will get you the marks. It's whether you can say how the author has used fact and opinion. That is, how do fact and opinion and the language used to express them relate to our old friends, purpose and audience? Have a look at this text. It's trying to draw attention to the serious problem of poverty in Britain. It uses a lot of factual information to make its point, such as statistics about the number of people who live in poverty. This one covers exactly the same topic, but it focuses on the opinions which people sometimes come out with about the problem. How can they be poor? They've all got videos. Both have the same function, but they go about presenting their message in very different ways. When the author of a text is trying to persuade you to believe an opinion, you'll often find that they use language which appeals to your emotions. This emotive language can be extreme at times, but can also be deceptively subtle. Emotive means language intended to arouse emotions and feelings of, for example, sympathy, disgust, sadness, happiness, and so on, with the topic being covered. Check this out. See what happens to a text when the emotive language is taken out.
16.5 weeks after being served by a boar in the metal-barred stall, the sow eventually gives birth on the concrete or perforated metal floor. In the wild, she would spend days carefully building an enormous nest. All she can do in the crate is to scratch around pathetically, trying to make a home for her children, who are then cruelly taken from her after only 2 weeks.
Does it sound as bad when some of the descriptive words and phrases are removed or replaced?
16.5 weeks after being served by a boar in the metal-barred stall, the sow eventually gives birth on the floor. In the wild, she would build a place to give birth. All she can do in the crate is to try to make a home for her piglets, who are taken from her after 2 weeks.
Don't be taken in. Emotive language can sound very convincing, but you have to decide if the writer is using it to twist meaning and manipulate your response. Ask yourself, why is the author using emotive language? Are you being persuaded? Here are some useful tips for sorting out fact from opinion. Look out for the way an author might use facts in a text. Facts are things like statistics, figures, and graphs. And look out for words which signal opinions. And look out for the use of emotive language. Another key word describing the way an author uses language is tone. Tone is difficult to define, but if you really want the higher grades, you should spend some time getting to grips with it. Tone is about how the whole text makes you feel, not just the individual words. Therefore, in order to get some idea of the general tone of a text, it is often necessary to read it through slowly from beginning to end, and often more than once. Tone can be a crucial factor in terms of how convincing an argument is being made, and how effectively you are persuaded by this argument. For example, a writer might be aiming for a cool, reasonable, logical tone by using a lot of factual information. On the other hand, a writer might use a lot of extreme opinion and emotive language to produce a passionate, angry tone. Similarly, the general tone of a text can be humorous, sad, sympathetic, or hostile to the case being made. In effect, the tone of a text refers to the way it makes us feel after we have read and understood it. Being able to distinguish between fact and opinion, identifying the tone, and being able to say what effect these matters have on non-fiction and media texts are important skills and ones that the examiners will be looking for in your exam answers. But there's a bit more to language than fact and opinion and tone. Let's go back to our Greenpeace leaflet and see what you notice about the language now. Have a look at this paragraph. Okay, how did you do? Let's see if what you noticed matched up.
Well, we thought long and hard about the sort of language that we wanted to use, and basically there's two types of language used in this leaflet. There's the factual writing, and then there's the active writing that's contained in the short pieces of information in the leaves, such as this one here, reduce, reuse, recycle. It's a very active, punchy language. We've included some statistics to back up the facts in the leaflet. This is very important for teachers who want to know that we've given a fair assessment of the problem. And we've also used the language of you, because we want you to know that although there's a problem, you can be part of the solution. When it comes to the tone of the leaflet, of course we're a campaigning organisation and we feel very strongly about this issue, but we've tried to use a measured tone so that we're not ranting. An example of this, a sentence that would be a good example, is this one. Incredible as it may seem, ancient forests are still being cut down to make cheap and disposable paper products, such as toilet tissue, milk cartons, magazines and newspapers.
Did you notice the use of careful emotive language? Remember what we said about persuasion? This is aimed at persuading you to Greenpeace's point of view.
So it's important to have a balanced tone so that there's a balance to the argument. And that starts here at the beginning of the leaflet, explaining what some of the problems are, looking at some examples and moving through to what the solutions are. All the language and format are pulling together to make the argument seem whole.
Okay, so there's factual and emotive writing which are used to inform you and to convey Greenpeace's opinion. This is backed up by statistics to add authority and is addressed directly to you, the reader, to make you feel more personally involved. The tone sounds balanced to make you feel that the message is reasoned and fair. All these points are pulling towards the same end, to make the argument work. This is an important point, as following an argument is definitely something which examiners will ask questions about. it's also one of the most difficult parts of the paper. We'll look at how to follow an argument in more detail a little later on in the programme. Just as careful use of language is crucial to getting the right message across in campaigning leaflets, like those produced by Greenpeace, so too with adverts is language choice a central aspect of making the advert work. Let's return to Seon at the advertising agency.
Slogans, or straplines as we call them, where do I start? Things like rhyme, alliteration, puns, all work well in slogans because it helps make it memorable. What's very popular at the moment with slogans is commands in the way that Nike has "just do it," which is very much a command. It's what we call a call to action, and it urges you to go out and do something.
Advertisers usually use language which is quirky and is designed to catch the attention of the target audience. Much use is therefore made of techniques such as alliteration, puns, general wordplay, slogans or commands. For example, as in the case of the recent Nike campaign and call to action, "Just do it." Magazines, too, rely on careful use of language for their success. How does J17 use language on its front cover?
How do you decide what kind of words make a cover line and what doesn't make a cover line, do you think? Like,
it's not the way that it sounds, it's actually the way that it looks. Basically, the way we come up with the cover lines is we sort of bandy words around. I mean, you know, we sort of just throw words around, you put them all together, and then from that, you'll find that things stick, things sound better, and, you know, or just something will grab you.
so there's lots of alliteration, like girl gangs, as well as puns and double meanings. Generally some scandal or gossip, as well as lines about boys, fashion and beauty.
There are lots of overlaps between the language of advertising and the language of magazine covers. This is because both are trying to sell something. In the case of advertising a product or service, and in the case of the front cover, the magazine itself. Also, in both advertising and magazine covers, the use of language is tied into format and layout, the look of the advert or magazine cover. Let's move on to argument. Following an argument is not about watching two people shouting at each other. It's about a writer's line of thought. An argument can be balanced and logical, and is frequently backed up by evidence and fact. Some arguments are designed to persuade you towards one point of view, whilst others might leave you, the reader, to make up your own mind. Have a look at this article. It's a piece of real journalism that looks like a solid slab of text. It lacks any of the organisational devices we saw in previous texts, but there is a pathway through. There are 4 main topic areas covered in the article, each developing on from the next. These main ideas can be found in these topic sentences. These points are the core of the piece. Pick these out and you can see the argument plainly. People who talk about a war on drugs treat drug use as an alien, private, minority activity which must be stamped out. The adequacy of this strategy can now be judged from yesterday's Institute for the Study of Drug Dependency report, Drugs Futures. As the report says, what were once drug subcultures are now a mainstream part of the democratic market economy society. They have become the norm. That does not make drug use right, any more than the availability of tobacco or alcohol makes consumption of these substances right. But it certainly requires policymakers and enforcement agencies to adopt a more realistic approach to the changed drug experience of the modern age. So what's left? Why not just write 4 sentences and leave it at that? Well, what's left are important elements of making a good argument. Each topic sentence is reinforced with a mixture of clarification and repetition of the main ideas. These add force to the argument to make it more powerful. Take these away, and what's left is a big chunk of illustrative facts around which the whole argument is constructed. In this case, the findings of the special report. Remove the facts, and then all you've got left is the conclusion. In this case, one that throws the argument open to debate. The fact that Labour, though claiming to be modern, should adopt the completely opposite approach in its by-election propaganda in the North West this week only goes to show how far we still have to go. So, to recap. If you want to check how a writer makes a convincing argument, find the topic sentences. Look for sentences which reinforce. Look for sentences which illustrate. And look at the ending. Now look at the text again. There are 4 paragraphs corresponding to the 4 main stages of the argument. That's not a coincidence. Paragraphs are there to guide you through to the main points of the argument. Use the divisions between them to divide your notes up when you do your first read-through. Finally, do make sure you look at the ending. This is a really useful way of establishing what the author's argument is. Here it's an open-ended, balanced view, but this isn't always the case. For example, when the case being put may be a bit more one-sided or maybe even biased, and perhaps, therefore, less effective as an argument. One of the best ways to try to understand how arguments are constructed is to look at the speeches which people make for public audiences. Asking you to write a speech is also a common task set by examiners in the writing section of the exam, which is covered in the second part of the programme. The speech in the following clip was made by Sojourner Truth, a black American civil rights campaigner in the 1850s. While you watch the speech, note how it uses emotive language. Then pause the tape and make notes about how the speech is structured to reinforce the meaning.
Shouldn't be allowed to speak. She's not a woman. I'm telling her, she's a man. She shouldn't be allowed to speak.
That man over there say, a woman needs to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Well, nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me a best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me. Look at my arm. I have plowed and planted and gathered into bonds, and no man could head me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as a man when I could get to it, and bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children and seen most all sold into slavery. And when I cried out a mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? That little man in black, they say, a woman can't have as much rights as a man, 'cause Christ wasn't a woman. Where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman. Man had nothing to do with him. But the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down, all alone, together. Women ought to be able to turn it right side up again.
Did you notice the use of emotive language and the impassioned tone of the speech? This language is designed to persuade you to change the way you think. Look at some of the devices Sojourner used. The most obvious device is repetition. She uses "Ain't I a Woman" to build up momentum. She uses it 4 times in just a few minutes. This reinforces her theme. She uses a rhythm of 3 verbs in a sentence to build tension, such as the sentences, "I have ploughed and planted and gathered into barns, and I could work as much and eat as much as any man when I could get to it, and bear the lashes well." She also uses contrasts to make her points more dramatic, such as in her opening and closing sentences. She makes the point that a man says women need to be helped into carriages before forcefully demonstrating the opposite. "Well, nobody helped me, and ain't I a woman?" Finally, the questions are thrown out to the audience to demand a response, making for a very confrontational tone. In non-fiction texts, like newspaper articles, leaflets, and speeches, the author's ability to argue a case is contained within the structure of the paragraphs, the choice of language, and the tone of voice that are used. Media texts also rely on language choice, tone, and structure to convey the argument or purpose of the text. Because media texts also rely on visual images as a means of persuasion, choice of pictures can often be crucial to the success or failure of a media text, like an advert. Let's go back to Seon at the advertising agency.
It's generally accepted that pictures are more powerful than words. I mean, obviously there's exceptions to this rule, but when you're walking around, you have to actively read words, whereas you sort of take pictures in. The way something's shot or the way something's illustrated can do more than just communicate what you're trying to say. A man holding an ice cream can be shot in many ways, and the fact that the Haagen-Dazs ad is shot in black and white, very arty, a certain type of models, tells you exactly how the company want you to think of their product. It gives you a certain sexiness, a certain feel. It does a hell of a lot of that work for you, and it would be very hard to do that in words. It's very hard to say this is a very sexy ice cream, and people think of it as being a sexy ice cream, but it's a lot easier to shoot it in a certain way and people to take out that message.
So when analysing media texts like adverts, we have to pay particular attention to the images or pictures which are central to the text. The use of an effective image or picture can often encapsulate what it might take hundreds of words to say. Also, we are bombarded by images all through the day without perhaps directly noticing them or taking them in. But they continue to have an effect on us at a subconscious level. The ways in which the images or pictures are shot are also extremely important in getting over the key idea or message of the text. For example, whether the picture is colour or black and white, whether it's shot with lots of light or minimal light, the choice of the models used, and so on. So when dealing with adverts, we usually have a key idea or key message, which the advertiser is trying to promote in order for the advert to successfully achieve its purpose. In the instance of the Haagen-Dazs advert, that key idea is that ice cream is sexy. And if you want to be sexy and attractive to members of the opposite sex, one way to achieve this is to eat Haagen-Dazs. The key idea is represented in the advert via the combination of format and layout, images and text. Let's look at the idea of representation in a little more detail, as it's central to the analysis of media texts. Representation can also refer not only to the way that the key idea is put across, but also to the way that individuals or groups are represented in the process. The Haagen-Dazs advert relied partially on its success to the way that men and women were portrayed. For example, there's lots of images of naked flesh, particularly the woman's. And the way that women are portrayed or represented is a central issue in studying and analysing certain types of media texts. Look at this clip on magazines, which draws attention to some commonly held gender and racial stereotypes.
Yeah, yeah.
women's mags have nearly always been niche market, basically special interest mags, whether it's cars or fishing or football. In 1986, it all changed with the first general lifestyle magazine, Arena.
Hold it there. That's a woman. What happened to all the blokes on the cover? I think they just reckoned that men weren't sexy enough. If you want to get more men to buy it, stick a woman on the cover.
Girls, 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 girls.
I don't mind women on magazine covers, I'm not offended by it, but what I don't really like is how they're represented. The shots conform to a very narrow stereotype of women. Young, very slender, white, with perfect, unblemished skin. And the likelihood of you being from an ethnic minority and on the front cover of a fashion magazine is so remote. 1996 saw Naomi Campbell become the first black model to grace the cover of a British Vogue magazine, and what a fuss it caused.
When analysing any media text, it's very important to be able to comment on how the key idea of the text is represented, but also how individuals or groups are represented in the process, and in particular, whether the advert is relying on particular stereotypes to convey its purpose. Here's a useful summary, which should help you when analysing any media text.
There are 5 main things you should look for when you're looking at ads. First one being the audience. Who is this ad aimed at? Who is the target market? The second is the idea, and how is it represented? The text. Is it big? Is it small? Is it just a headline? Is it a lot of copy? The picture. How's it been shot? Is it an illustration? Is it in black and white? And the 5th one is the layout. How does the thing look as a whole?
Now, check out the following, which will give you a guide to the kind of answer that will get you the marks you need. Suppose you were asked to comment on the format of the Greenpeace leaflet. As part of your answer, you would want to describe the use of the leaf motif. Here are some short sample sentences which give you an idea of what sort of answer would get what kind of grade. Answer 1. The leaflet uses leaves to give advice. This makes them stand out clearly. This answer identifies the main purpose of the leaf motif, but doesn't say much about how it works. This kind of answer would probably be heading for an F grade. Answer 2. The leaflet uses green leaf designs to carry pieces of advice about recycling. The distinctive font and the bright colour make the leaves stand out to reinforce the message. This answer goes into a bit more detail about how the motif attracts attention and hints at the connection between the green leaves and the recycling theme. This kind of answer would probably be heading for a C grade. Answer 3. Green leaves are splashed about the poster, carrying simple, clear pieces of advice about how to recycle materials. The simplicity and brightness produce a friendly, natural effect, in contrast to the dense blocks of text and detailed illustration. Now this answer goes into much more detail about how the motif is used and why it is effective, commenting on the contrast between this design element and the blocks of text. This answer would probably be heading for an A grade. Now let's look at the language. Suppose you were asked to discuss the kind of language used in the Greenpeace leaflet. As part of your answer, you'd want to deal with whether it's factual or emotive, and what its purpose is. Answer 1. The leaflet uses long sentences and a lot of information. This makes the message seem serious. This answer mentions only the length of sentences and the link between this and the serious tone of the leaflet. An answer like this would probably be heading for an F grade. Answer 2. The language is factual and avoids any extreme opinions. The advice is short, clear, and to the point. This candidate has noticed a few more points about the language, the effectiveness of the advice, and the factual tone. This kind of answer would probably be heading for a C grade. Answer 3. The sentences in the main body of the text are balanced and neutral, and the language is factual in tone, avoiding any obvious attempt to sway the reader's judgment. The leaves contain direct, personal advice, which is short, clear, and practical. Now, this answer makes the same points as the last one, but describes the language and how it works in much more detail, using phrases like balanced and neutral, factual in tone, and short, clear, and practical. A candidate who included writing like this in their answer would be heading for an A grade. Finally, analysing the argument. Examiners will expect you to show how a text like this moves from point to point to reach a conclusion. Using the drugs leaflet we showed you earlier as an example, if you were asked to comment on the writer's argument, here are some short examples of how you might begin an answer. Answer 1. The writer says that it is no good saying everyone who uses drugs is a criminal. The new report shows most young people take drugs, so we have to think differently. This analysis confines itself to the starting point and conclusion of the argument. It is very basic. An answer like this would probably be heading for an F grade. Answer 2. The writer uses the report's findings to show that it is no longer any use simply regarding drugs as criminal. Drug taking is now normal behaviour amongst young people, and it is time the government recognised that fact. This answer shows more awareness of the subtleties of the article's argument, of the use to which the writer puts the report's findings, and of possible implications for government policy. An answer like this would probably be heading for a C grade. Answer 3. The writer uses the report's findings in detail to illustrate how outdated and misguided are the attitudes of people who simply regard drug taking as criminal. The report makes it clear that drug taking is the norm amongst young people, and we therefore need a new legal framework to deal with that fact. Answer number 3 is more detailed still, includes the regional angle on the debate about drugs policy, and shows an understanding of how considered and balanced the argument is. Does not offer concrete solutions, but suggests that. An answer like this would probably be heading for an A grade. This is the end of the section on analysing a text. Now we move on to comparing non-fiction and media texts, a task that you will be asked to do in the exam. In this unit, we're going to look at 3 non-fiction texts: a letter, a newspaper report, and a poem. They were written nearly 150 years ago about an event known as the Charge of the Light Brigade.
During the Crimean War, the Light Brigade cavalry charged down the Wrong Valley. They were supposed to recapture British guns on one side of the valley. Instead, they charged down the valley towards the Russian guns, which were guarded by Russian troops. What became known as the Charge of the Light Brigade has been documented in many different ways: in film and songs, in newspapers, letters, paintings, and poems. All these versions arise because they're made by different people for different audiences.
We're going to compare 3 texts and the way the different writers have interpreted the event. You'll hear sections from each text, starting with one by a soldier called Richard Temple Godman. It's a letter to his brother.
Later in the day, the Light Brigade charged down a valley. They had no business to have gone there. They lost about 300, but can't get the number exactly. They took 25 guns and killed an immense number, but were totally annihilated by batteries on each side of the valley. The weather is fearfully cold, and if it were not for a Russian officer's coat I found after the charge lined with fur, I don't know what I should do. We lost a man today, The doctor says he died of the cold last night. Another is dying. I think we are quite sure of another row. I don't fear their swords at all, but don't like their lances. Neville was badly wounded, and Swinfen run through the hand and a lance wound in the chest very slightly. Elliot cut badly on the head and nose. He went in a regular mucker. Our brigadier behaved most pluckily. Went right in, got his helmet smashed, hand cut, clothes cut through, and horse much cut, and spent ball on the arm. He is all right. I think the brutes must have killed our wounded. They will get no quarter next time. I feel sure we must have another row, and I may not get so well out next time. But unless a bullet takes me off, I think I shall be able to do something with them first.
So the important things to remember about this text are that it was a letter written by a soldier on or near the battlefield, to be read privately by his brother at home. This soldier was probably in a tent with wounded comrades nearby at night in freezing temperatures, fearing that the next day would bring another battle and possibly his own death. If we look closely, we can see how the language of the letter reflects this situation. For example, the use of soldiers' slang. This can sometimes be used to avoid talking about the harsh realities of war. He used names of soldiers which the younger brother would probably know. He used long, disjointed sentences which show there was no time to compose and rewrite the letter. The thoughts were written as they came into his head. The quick changes of thoughts passing through his mind, from the charge, to the weather, to his injured comrades. The second text is a report, or dispatch, written by William Howard Russell for the Times newspaper. When looking at this text, you need to take into account that the writer was at the battlefield, watching with other civilians from a distance. He was writing for readers at home who would be concerned about the progress of the war and eager for news of British heroism. He needed to explain what had happened and to communicate the horror he felt about it.
A different account of the battle was also sent home from the Crimea. This was written by William Howard Russell, who was the Times newspaper's war correspondent.
At 10 minutes past 11, our light cavalry brigade advanced. As they rushed towards the front, the Russians opened on them from the guns in the redoubt on the right with volleys of rifles, with volleys of musketry and rifles. They swept proudly past, glittering in the morning sun, in all the pride and splendor of war. We could scarcely believe the evidence of our eyes. The evidence of our senses. Surely that handful of men are not going to charge an army position. Alas, it was but too true. Their desperate valor knew no bounds, and far indeed was it removed from its so-called better part, discretion. Their flight was marked by instant gaps in our ranks, by dead men and horses, steeds flying, riderless or wounded, across the plain. The first line is broken. It is joined by the second. They never halt or check their speed an instant. With diminished ranks, thinned by those 30 guns, which the Russians had laid with the most deadly accuracy, with a halo of flashing steel above their heads, and with a cheer which was many a noble fellow's death cry, they flew into the smoke of the battery. But ere they were lost from view, the plain was strewn with their bodies, and with the carcasses of horses.
They were exposed to an oblique fire from the batteries on the hills on both sides, as well as to direct fire of musketry.
So if we look closely at the sections of the report we heard in the programme, we can see how the language is suited to the purpose. For example, you can see how the writer gives factual details of the situation, so the readers can understand the order of events. He used vivid description, so his readers could visualize the drama of the scene. He writes of the British soldiers in heroic language, to make people feel proud of them. To make us understand his horror, the writer puts us in his own position, sometimes even switching tense, so that it's as if we're following the events as they happen. He varies his sentences so they appeal to the readers. The third text we're going to look at is a poem. We naturally think of poetry as fiction, but this one is an account of a real event.
The most famous text on the battle is a poem by Tennyson. It was actually inspired by Tennyson reading the article in the Times, which had been written by William Howard Russell.
Emily. Half a league, half a league, half a league onward, all in the valley of death, rode the 600. Forward the light brigade. Charge for the gun, he said. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Forward the light brigade. Was there a man dismayed? Not though the soldier knew someone had blundered. Theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die. Into the valley of death rode the 600.
Before we look at the language, let's just recap on the important points about why it was written. As poet laureate, Tennyson had to create poetry which would commemorate important events. He was writing for all British people, not just the educated ones who could read, but also people who couldn't read. He naturally had to write from a patriotic viewpoint, celebrating British achievements. He was writing about heroism, rather than analysing how the battle was fought. His poem reflects this by writing in what we would call the oral tradition, like a ballad, using a strong rhythm like the galloping of the horses. He uses rhyming words and repetition to make the poem memorable. In fact, it was later turned into a song and became a music hall favourite. Tennyson isn't concerned with the facts of the situation, but writes in a rousing, heroic way with many exclamations and appeal to the listener. Finally, although we focused on the differences between the texts, there are some similarities too. All three of the writers are patriotic, but all of them criticised the mistake which led to the slaughter of the Light Brigade. They are by no means outright protests, but they make sure the readers know that something had gone wrong. In the exam, you'll be asked to comment on and compare the non-fiction and media texts which the examiners have set. It's important that you're able to comment on their different purposes and audiences, their different use of language, the impact that any pictures or images have, and also which is the most effective at getting over its message and why. That's the end of this section on comparing non-fiction and media texts. So let's summarise the skills you need to read a non-fiction text in the exam. You have to try to get inside the writer's head and work out what they're up to. Your first step is to think about what the author was trying to achieve. Then, whom the text is aimed at. Then look at the way format and layout has been used, and at the language of the text. Use all of the above to analyse the argument, and when commenting on comparison of different texts. OK, that's the end of the first part of the programme on reading non-fiction and media texts. So you can read a text, but can you write one? In the exam, you're going to be asked to write 1 or 2 non-fiction texts for yourself. This part of the programme looks at the skills you need to pick up marks on the writing section of the paper. The writers in the first half wrote about something that was important to them, so they chose the best way to express it. Your exam grade depends on what you write, so make it your business to be interested in the topic you get asked about. You need the marks. Here's how to get them. There are essentially 4 steps to writing any piece of non-fiction: the question, planning, composing, and checking. Step 1 is check that you understand the question or brief. Whatever you do, make sure you answer the question. This may sound obvious, but it's probably the single most important piece of advice we can give you. More marks are lost by writing off the point than anything else. Read the question twice and make sure you understand exactly what you are being asked to do. To do this, all you need to do is apply the same kind of checklist that we used earlier in the programme. Remember, purpose, audience, and format and layout. Once you've read the question, work out what you are being asked to write, what the purpose of the text is. Work out who you're writing for, who is the audience. And finally, work out what format or layout is being asked for. As you can see from the following sequence, a professional writer working to a brief has to go through exactly the same kind of checklist.
My name's Kitty Melrose. I'm the editor of a children's newspaper called The Young Telegraph, and I edit and write for our readers who are aged between 8 and 14. At the moment, I'm working on an article on zoos. We're looking at for and against. It's quite a controversial issue, obviously, so there's a lot of research involved.
Don't you think it's cruel to keep animals like this in captivity?
No, I don't. I think it's a mistake to believe that zoos are inherently cruel.
The first thing that I have to do when I'm starting an article is think about the purpose. In the case of zoos, it's quite simple, a for and against piece. But whatever I'm writing, I have to bear in mind the audience that I'm writing for. In my case, it's 8 to 14-year-olds, which means that I have to keep my writing really clear, really concise, to the point. But my main aim is to be informative as well as entertaining, because I want them to read the piece, basically, so I've got to keep their interest up. I also, in the case of zoos, I want to present a balanced viewpoint. I'm not trying to brainwash my readers either way. I want to present the for, present the against, and let them make their own minds up. I also have to think about format as well, and a lot of the articles that I write can range from anything from 100-word pieces to a page or a double-page spread. And in the case of the zoo piece, I've decided I'm going to put it over a double-page spread because it's so complex. It's a can of worms, basically, so I need all the space that I can get.
Kitty assesses her purpose, audience, and format and layout before starting any piece. If you want to practice this, pause the tape and copy this table before trying the next exercise. Here is a series of real past exam questions. As you read each, pause the tape and fill in your columns. Write an article for a teenage magazine in which you argue the case for more help to be given to the homeless. A local radio station is running a phone-in program to hear people's views about the National Lottery. You decide you want to contribute. You know that you will have limited time on the air and you need to organise your thoughts, so you prepare yourself by writing down what you want to say. Write your contribution to this radio program. Many families have their own particular traditions. These may be to do with how they celebrate holidays, religious festivals, or particular times of the year. Write about your family traditions and explain their importance to you. How did you do? Here's our table. It's about looking for the key words. Sometimes they're obvious. Sometimes you have to really think about what the question is getting at. And watch out, as sometimes the examiner doesn't tell you who to write for, so you can only conclude that you're writing for them. Once you know why you're writing and who you're writing for, you can get down to the real job of planning how you're going to write, making the right choices about what kind of format or layout and what kind of language you should use. To do this, you have to make a plan. That's the end of the section on understanding the questions you will get in your exam. Now we move on to planning. Ask any examiner and they'll tell you a plan is vital. If you've got an hour for the question, you should spend about 15 minutes on the plan. Planning stops you rambling off the point. It makes sure you keep the right points in the right order. Planning allows you to organise your time effectively and takes the pressure off. Once it's done, you know where you're going. Basically, it's no good having a bright idea 5 minutes before the end of the exam. It's too late then. So your thinking time needs to be at the start. Your plan is based on what you've decided about audience, purpose, and format. That allows you to plan for the main points of content. So, make notes first about these points and get them in the right order by planning how you're going to begin, what's going to come in the middle, and keep on planning right through to the end. Planning the end is particularly important because not knowing when to shut up will lose you marks. It shows you don't understand what you're trying to do, so make your points, back them up if necessary, and shut up. Once you've got a plan, your writing will already be organised into chunks, providing a kind of structure or way through the information. When you write, organise these chunks into paragraphs. You may be asked for a particular type of layout, so make sure you take this into account. Finally, just a note about the type of language you're going to use. Look back at the points you made about audience. That will tell you how you need to tailor your language, whether you're writing something formal or casual, to an older or younger audience, for example. Now, if you still think planning isn't important, take it from a professional writer.
When I'm writing any kind of article, it's always the research and the planning that's vital. And I do work by the premise that it's 90% researching and planning and 10% writing. I can't just go into a feature and start writing without actually sitting down with my big pile of information, all my material, all my quotes, all my facts and figures, and reading it and rereading it until I'm completely familiar with it. That way I've already kind of built up a picture of how the feature's going to work, the order of the paragraphs. With the zoo piece, I did exactly as I normally would with any feature. I came up with a number of paragraphs. Obviously, it begins with the introduction. So I'll actually sit down with a blank piece of paper. Number 1, introduction. Number 2, history. Number 3, against. Number 4, for. And number 5, conclusion. And then I'll go back over those headings and write crossheads. When I've written the pros and cons, I do rearrange the order because obviously I've just slotted information in as I've read through my material. Obviously there's a flow that needs to be sustained when you're writing the piece, and you can move around the paragraphs that are appropriate to that. For instance, I talked about the cruelty of zoos, then went on to talk about how that affects animal behaviour. Now, it was quite natural for me to then flow on to education to show that because you're seeing animals in a fake environment, you're not actually seeing their true characteristics. You have to give all the arguments. It's the other side of the coin. Then, once you've gone through all those, you come to the conclusion and you decide which way you want to go in the conclusion. Either you go to one side of the coin or the other side, or you leave it very much open, which is what I'm going to do.
Here's an exercise to help your planning skills. Your school has raised £3,000 during Activities Week, and the head teacher has asked your opinion in the form of a letter about 3 possible ways of spending it. Either buying a new computer, putting it towards a new minibus, or giving it away to a local children's charity. You feel strongly that the money should go to the third of these. So how are you going to persuade the head teacher? Pause the tape now and write a plan for a letter to persuade the head to agree with you. Here's what we thought would do the trick. First of all, we wanted to grab the head's attention, so we started with a clear statement of our views, and we'll aim to keep it brief. The second paragraph, we thought, should contain the reasons for our opinion. We needed to head off any arguments for the other choices, so that was our third paragraph. The final paragraph is planned to reinforce our argument by repeating it, but also to appeal to the head's good sense, a nice piece of psychology. As for format and language, we've sketched out a letter layout. We've decided to use a centered heading like this. It helps to make it look nice and definite right at the start. Shows you mean business. And finally, for the language, we'll use formal letter conventions such as yours sincerely, but with a personal, direct tone. Don't forget those last 2 points about layout and language. They apply to any kind of writing, whether it's a letter or an article. For a professional writer, they're essential.
When I'm planning, I obviously have to take the format and layout into account. Our features are 500 words per page, so that means that I have to always be aware that my paragraphs are short and to the point, that they're punchy, that they get the message across straight away. I always have to keep in mind the kind of language that I use, especially for my audience, which is 8 to 14. I tend not to use big words. They're not always clever. You've got to keep to the point. You've got to get the information across concisely and clearly, and you've just got to keep it entertaining and interesting as well.
There isn't just one way of planning either. Get used to the one which suits you, so it feels natural in the exam. That's the end of the section on planning your writing. Once you've planned, you can start writing. You can begin to compose. This is where you start composing, writing your answer against the clock. So you need a couple of reminders to keep you thinking straight. The first point is, make an impact.
The first sentence of the first paragraph I think is most important. Basically, that's what draws the reader into the feature as a whole. You know, there's so many articles in newspapers and in magazines, you know, why should they want to read mine? And it all comes down to that very first sentence. It's so vital. That's why it has to be punchy, it has to be short, concise, and it really has to draw them in. So it's got to be something that's really entertaining as well. It's got to actually set the scene so you know what subject we're going to be talking about or they're going to be reading about, and it's got to say I want to know more. Basically, you've got to make them think that. As with any first paragraph, first sentence, there's so many ways that you can start it. What I originally planned to do with the zoo piece was to begin with some facts and figures. You know, for instance, there are 10,000 zoos worldwide, 300 in the UK. But I kind of feel that this is a bit flat. It's not going to grab the reader's attention that much. So what I'm about to do now is to read through all my letters that I've received from my readers on the subject of zoos, and this is one subject they've got opinions on, so I want to involve them a bit more in the feature. And so I'm going to start off with their comments basically, and I think that it will grab their attention because it's actually them talking. The way that I end a feature is equally as important as the way that I begin it, I feel. With the zoo piece, I'm planning to end it by throwing the whole issue out to my readers. I don't want them to go one way or go another just because of something that I've said. I want to make them think. So I'm just going to make them aware of both sides of the argument in the conclusion, let them go away and think about it.
Paying attention to the opening and closing sentences can help your writing a lot. You need to make an impact and grab the examiner's attention. Remember that advice, it's very useful, especially that part about knowing when to stop. If you've organised that final paragraph, you'll leave your audience knowing your main ideas or your opinion. The final sentence is vital here. It might be open-ended and balanced, or it might be a passionate point of view. Either way, the ending says a lot about how well you have put your writing together, and it's what stays longest in the reader's memory. You've already spent time planning your writing, so you'll already have organised your points into some kind of structure. Now you've started writing, stick to the structure, but try to make your writing flow easily from one point to the next. Make it fluent. Fluency means leading your reader smoothly through your writing, controlling the pace and linking points together. It's no good having brilliant thoughts if they come out in an unconnected jumble. Keeping it fluent is down to handling a few simple but very important words.
What do you have in common with Patrick Moore, the Queen, or Frank Bruno? What do all these people have in common with each other?
Whatever dialect you speak, and whatever subject you sing or talk about, it's amazing to think that you use the same set of grammatical words as everybody else.
Although more and more lexical words, nouns, verbs, adverbs and adjectives come into English every day, the number of grammatical words stays pretty much the same.
Why is that, I hear you ask? Well, it's because we can manage perfectly well with the ones that we have already. In fact, grammatical words haven't changed very much at all for 1,000 years or more.
So these basic, simple words hold the key to varying your sentence structure and impressing the examiner. It's not always about dazzling with clever words. It's about having a sure footing and control over your writing. These linking words are also sometimes called connectives. The reason for this is that these sorts of words are used to connect up different parts or clauses of sentences. In effect, connectives are used to turn simple sentences into more complex ones. Link these sentences together using some of the words at the bottom of the screen. Pause the tape to work on each of the sentences. Getting your writing to read well whilst writing against the clock is even more essential when you're delivering something like a radio news report.
13 minutes past 8. A very good morning to you. Welcome to Good Morning Leicester with Abir Zahran.
Radio Leicester.
Names are having to find 100.
Turning written language into spoken language is something radio reporters do every day.
Anna, could you work on this story on the City Council? They've awarded a contract for grounds maintenance to a Lancashire firm, so the in-house team have lost out. All the details are there on which parks they cover and everything. So if you can write me a voice piece on that for the morning bulletins, okay? Thank you. Debbie, is that for the morning?
Oh, okay, thank you. And City Landscapes has been carrying this out sort of up until this point, isn't it? Well, the in-house firm, anyway. Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Thanks very much, Simon. All right, bye-bye. You tend to read as you write, read out aloud, because at the end of the day, that's how it's going to actually go out on air. So if it sounds right as you're saying it, then that's you're halfway there. But often you can write something and it actually doesn't sound right. It might look good on paper, but when you actually say it, it doesn't come across well. So if you keep reading it, it's actually a way for you to actually hear how it would sound when it's actually broadcast.
Anna Eastman reports it's only the second time the council's in-house firms lost out to private contractors. Yeah, that's fine. We write very differently from newspapers. And when I'm taking people on, that's one of the main things I'm looking at is can they make the transition? If you're writing for newspapers, you can be more formal and you can take a longer time to say something. If you're writing for radio, you need to attract somebody's attention straight away and go straight in there with the main point of the story, otherwise the listener gets completely confused and turns off and wanders away from the radio. So it has to be very catchy, very tight, and also presented as I would tell you a story, for instance. I haven't said... We're about talking and we're about speech. So quite often we'll come across press releases that just have to be changed to use the everyday words that people would use. We've got quite a long time. We've got 7 minutes, which is quite a long time. And you often have hiccups like this.
Given, and councillors look set to give the go-ahead. The council hopes to achieve any job losses through voluntary redundancy or early retirement.
It's actually a bit fast, because there's that real balance to try and keep between actually sounding, or trying to sound interesting, but also not rushing through it. Right, we'll do it once more. The 4-year contract is to provide maintenance for parks in the east of the city.
To put this section out to tender, and 10 companies put in bids for the work. The Lancashire firm Glendale Industries submitted the lowest tender, almost £200,000 less than its nearest rival, the in-house firm City Landscapes.
OK, we've got a couple of minutes to get that on.
You can't use your voice to convey the content of your writing to an examiner, so you have to make your writing read well on paper. Varying your sentence structure can help to make your writing interesting and hold the reader's attention. Here's how smash hits journalists get the right feel in an article. This one's a review of a film.
Done this, it'll go to Mike, he'll scan it for mistakes, sentence forming, paragraph forming, and then it'll go to the production editor, he'll check it for spelling and grammar, and it'll go to the designer, he'll put it on the page and design it. And then it'll go out on the streets.
Hi Lise, I managed to have a look at this now. I think it's a really good review basically. There are quite a lot of marks on here, but nothing to worry about there. I've tried to explain again the thing about the Hitler Youth, just because I think that does need a bit more explaining. I've written a bit my explanation of it basically down there, but if you could have a look at that in a minute and just see if you think that's okay. What are the other things down here? Just that mistake there, and also I think this was really the best bit. It was just the bit at the end about Robert Sean Leonard that really made me laugh. So we're going to make those changes on disc and then hand it over.
All right then.
Thanks, Lise.
Thank you. It's so much fun to sit down at the computer, write exactly what you want to write, and have your reader in mind, and then know that the reader's going to read it afterwards.
The very fact that a film is covered in the teenage press is this, it starts the ball rolling with that audience. They will then use another film critic or their own friends to tell them whether they should see it or not.
Smash Hits has a real style to its reviews, its big reviews, that describes the characters, then the plot, and then what you liked and disliked about it, best line, worst scenario, and just take it from there.
I think with Smash Hits, we don't necessarily follow proper grammatical rules. We will, if it feels right, we'll write a sentence that lasts for an entire paragraph. If we want to get across the idea of something's fast-moving, there's a lot of action, we'll tend to use very short sentences, sometimes not even proper sentences grammatically, but just very short, very fast and pacey. A bit like a television programme or a film, if there's a piece of action going on, they'll really quickly edit, and it'll cut from this to this to this to this. And I think we use those kinds of techniques when we're actually writing in Smash Hits.
Unfortunately, you can't afford to be ungrammatical, but you can use your sentence structure to vary the pace. Whether you want your writing to be snappy, smooth, light-hearted or deadly serious. The last point we want to make is about tone. It's a difficult concept, but all you need to remember is to keep it consistent. Let's say you've started in a calm, formal way because you're writing to someone you don't know that well. The examiner will be looking to see whether you can keep it going, whether you can write consistently. Take this, for example. I bought this pair of socks at your store on 23rd September. They were in the autumn sale and had been reduced to half price. The first time I wore them, I found that all the seams had come undone. Embarrassing or what? Oh dear. So how does a professional writer like Kitty go about keeping her writing fluent and consistent?
When you're in the midst of writing a feature or an essay or a letter even, I know how easy it is to go off track, which is why you have to refer back to A, your purpose, and B, your plan. You've really got to keep looking at your plan throughout writing the feature. You've got to stick to it. Basically, I know how easy it is to waffle on and flower things up, but at the end of the day, you know, you haven't got the time and you haven't got the space, so keep referring back to that plan all the time. Another important thing that I always have to remember when I'm writing a feature is who I'm writing the feature for. People think, you know, that it's really easy to write for teenagers. In fact, it's incredibly hard because A, you come across as really dull, and B, really patronising. And, you know, I don't want to come across as either of those things. So the way that I work it is that I pretend that I'm actually talking to my readers, but I am strict with myself in terms of sentence construction, in terms of grammar, in terms of slang. You know, I keep my sentences really short and punchy. Again, that, you know, I've got to be entertaining, and in that way I've got to maintain the pace. You know, it's very easy to make a big impact in your introduction, but you've got to keep the momentum going.
So take it from Kitty. Keep referring back to your plan. Talk to your audience. Watch your grammar and spelling, and keep your momentum going. Stay in control of your writing, and if you get really lost, stop. Draw a neat line through, go right back to your brief, and start your paragraph again, keeping in mind your purpose and audience. That's the end of this section on composing your writing. Now we move on to checking your text. So, you've written your text, but you're not done yet. The last 5 minutes could be crucial. An important part of the exam is checking your work. There's no time for a major rewrite, but you can look back and tidy up any mark losers you spot. Have a go yourself. These boys are writing a letter to the local council about building a skateboard park. Look at the way they describe the content and form.
We really need a ramp that's close, easy to get to. Has to be sort of fenced off as well, so that no little children can get hurt who aren't really skaters. A ramp that's well built, safe.
We get a lot of hassle in the streets from like people, anybody, old people and young people.
It's us who gets hassle, really, not them. We're the one who gets chucked off.
If we have like a specific place to skate, we won't get any hassle, and we can put that in the letter.
We'll tell them that we'll be off the streets and we'll be in this special area, and that'll keep them happy, it'll keep us happy.
We'll have to tell them to wear protective clothing.
Dear Sir, Madam, we the skateboarders of Chiswick need a ramp or other skateboard facility near or in the Chiswick area where all the skaters can skate safely, free from hassle and crime or vandalism. Every day when we come out skating, we get hassled from the general public.
The council may think that we're the one giving the hassle if we say that, so cross that out.
They'll get the wrong idea.
And, what should we say?
We're looking at a first draft. There are lots of mistakes. And in order to be taken seriously, they've got to be eliminated. If this were the letter, and you were asked to check it through, would you be able to help? Give yourself a minute to check the errors. Dear Sir, Madam, we, the skateboarders of Chiswick, need a ramp or other skateboard facility near or in the Chiswick area where all the skaters can skate safely, free from hassle and crime or vandalism. People think skateboarders cause trouble and are a nuisance, but that is not true. We should be taken seriously because we take an interest in our sport and need somewhere to practice. If we got this ramp, we would take care of it and make sure it was maintained properly. Yours sincerely, Chiswick Skaters. Well, how did you do? Here's what you should have spotted. Did you notice the spelling mistakes, nuisance and facility? The use of slang, which would be inappropriate for a formal letter of this sort, and punctuation mistakes. There should be a full stop after practice and a capital letter to start the next sentence. Oh, and don't forget, when you start a letter with Dear Sir or Madam, it must end with Yours faithfully. Even professional writers need to check before they are prepared to hand over the finished article.
When I write the last sentence of my feature, it's by no means the end for me. I think it's really important to go back over it, reread it, make sure that all the paragraphs flow naturally, that they're in the right order. It's also really important to do a spell check, make sure all the grammar's correct. But the main aim is to make sure that you're completely happy with it.
You might be tired at the end of the exam, but 5 minutes checking can make the difference between grades. And whilst we're at it, here are some of the classic mistakes you should make it your business to avoid. Now take a look at the following, which gives you a guide to the grade you'd achieve for different levels of fluency and style in the writing part of your exam. Suppose that in your actual exam, you were asked to write a letter appealing to the council to provide you with a skateboarding facility. How would you do? Here are some sample answers which give you an idea about what sort of response would achieve what kind of grade. Answer 1. More should be done to help young people who like skateboarding. More and more people enjoy skateboarding, but there is nowhere for us to practice. We have to use the streets, so people think we are a nuisance. The council should build a skateboard park. This answer incorporates most of the main points that need to come across, but it's little more than a list, with little attempt to make the writing flow from sentence to sentence. As a result, it's not very persuasive. This kind of answer would probably be heading for an F grade. Answer 2. I am writing to complain about the lack of facilities for skateboarders. There are many young people who enjoy skateboarding, and the number is growing every year. There are facilities for every other sport, but the only place skateboarders can practice is the street. I therefore feel it is time the council built a skateboard park. This answer contains the same points, but personalises the argument by using phrases like, I am writing to complain, and I therefore feel. The writing is more fluent, and therefore more persuasive. This kind of answer would probably be heading for a C grade. Answer 3. I am writing on behalf of the growing number of young people who enjoy skateboarding. Because the council provides no facilities for skateboarders, we have no alternative but to use the streets. Understandably, pedestrians find this a nuisance and have every right to complain. However, given that almost every other activity has a proper amenity, we feel it is time the council recognised our needs. Now this candidate has all the plus points of the C grade version, but has linked the sentences together even more with linking words such as because, understandably, and however. It feels both balanced and persuasive. It would probably be heading for an A grade. That's the end of the second part on writing non-fiction and media texts. That's the end of the whole programme on reading and writing non-fiction and media. The other two programmes on English are Poetry and Macbeth. Don't forget, you can find more information in the GCSE Bitesize books and on the website at www.bbc.co.uk/revision.